The CEO of this $4.7 trillion bank is warning of a potential economic depression, not just in the United States, but globally, because of the signs that we are seeing in the market all over the world, but specifically the bond market. Now, let's not listen to me. Let's listen to Jamie Dimon and what he had to say exactly about the bond market.
Are going to see a crack in the bond market, okay? It is going to happen. And I tell this to my regulators, some of who are in this room, I'm telling you it's going to happen, and you're going to panic. I'm not going to panic. We'll be fine. We'll probably make more money, and then some of my friends will tell me that we like crises because it's good for J.P. Morgan Chase. No.
So would you listen to that? Jamie Dimon is telling us, hey, you are going to panic because of what we are seeing in the bond market. That is very interesting. And he's even saying the quiet parts out loud here where it'll actually benefit JP Morgan Chase. And he's saying, hey, look, the regulators, you guys are going to panic, but we're going to make a lot of money off of it because we know what we're doing. And then everybody's going to blame JP Morgan Chase because they're the snakes in all of this. But I think it's interesting. We got to read between the lines a little bit more on what he is saying, because the bond market is on edge, but less so this week after a smooth treasury auctions and talk of key banking reform. So JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon says, we're going to say that the regulators are going to panic with all of this. And he's even saying it's going to happen. He says this bond market crash is going to happen and that they should be stockpiling military equipment instead of Bitcoin. Now, he even said some other interesting things in this great interview as well about the economic shift and the potential of some geopolitical issues as well. So let's listen in a little bit more on this, because I want to dive into more of what Jamie Dimon is saying.
Various things, and they're changing. And then our debt, which you just heard a bunch of folks talk about eloquently, it's large, and it's not just us. We added $10 trillion in 5 years. We have, you had Reagan up there talking about deficits. The debt to GDP was 35%, and the deficit was 3.5%. Today, it's 100% debt to GDP net, and a deficit of almost 7%, highest peacetime ever. And when the CBO does their numbers,
so he's just going over some of the data that is absolutely shocking. And I've been reporting a lot of this on this channel for quite some time now, because the GDP and everything, everybody's saying that the overall market is not in a terrible place. But the reality is that there's a lot of cracks underneath the surface. I mean, let's face it here. Look at the signs here. GDP is higher than the overall debt. It's 100%. Anytime that has happened previously, we've seen the global reserve currency, or whatever the currency is at that time, we've seen economic failure. Now, Jamie Dimon in this interview as well also says, hey, if you think that we're going to have the global reserve currency in 40 years with the way things are going, I'd call you crazy. So it's not just me and the bears over here on the Macro Insight channel saying all these things. Jamie Dimon is saying the quiet parts out loud. And we covered Japan not too long ago. And something that I uncovered here that I think is very unique. What happened in 1994? There was a giant bond market crisis, a sudden drop in that bond market, and it began in Japan. And we've been covering the issues that we've been seeing in the Japanese market for quite some time, and it spread to the rest of the world. And so because the Japanese economy is so intertwined with the United States economy, in fact, the Japanese is the number one holder of the United States bonds. Because of that factor, this is something that we have to keep a close eye on. We've seen the Japanese bond market potentially get some issues here, and we've seen the flip-flopping back and forth with the Japanese, little moves being made here, like the carry trade getting blown up in August of last year. And now we're potentially seeing the bond market in the United States go bonkers, right? We're seeing it go crazy. And, a lot of people are losing faith in the U.S. market. It's not just me. It's not just Jamie Dimon. 60% of CEOs expect a recession in the next 6 months. Now, this was, of course, before the pullback of the tariffs that we've seen, but this was an expectation not too long ago. And with the United States dollar as the global reserve currency, the number one thing that we need is the people to be confident in the US. And what did Jamie Dimon say? We need to be stockpiling guns, ammunition, all these kinds of things that point to very uncertain time and wartime, actually. So it's interesting that we see this, right? The data comes as President Donald Trump's tariff rollout has set financial markets reeling about the business world. But in reality, a lot of people are still wondering, hey, are we going to see the US bond market crack? Is this something that's going to happen here pretty soon? Because Jamie Dimon told the Economic Forum that the US bond market was going to crack. This big, beautiful bill, he said, is now working his way. And I just don't know if it's going to be a crisis in 6 months or 6 years. But the interesting thing is a lot of these policies that Jamie Dimon is actually lining out here, which I agree with him on, is that the after and the layover effects of these policies, we're not going to know, and we're not going to see the layover effects of these things for the next 6 months to potentially 6 years. I mean, look at what happened in, the cerveza sickness, as my man George Gammon loves to pin it. We're seeing the effects of that massive amounts of QE, quantitative easing, in 2020, 2021. We're seeing those layover effects now, and that's why we're seeing inflation where it is. Now, I get it. You guys are going to tell me, hey, we're down on inflation. We're down to 2.5%. But the reality is that inflation is still very high. Everybody's saying we got to take out food and energy of the overall inflationary metrics, which I think is absolutely crazy. And I don't really understand how you can talk about inflation and get rid of the food and energy, because those are obviously essential to live. But, that's neither here nor there. We're still looking at the bond market be absolutely bonkers here. The overall bond market outlook for 2025 has presented a mixed picture. It's presented both opportunities and uncertainties. Here's a breakdown of the key themes. Favorable environment. It's attracting starting yields. Potential for what rate cuts. But as many of you guys know, I'll get into it in a second. The potential rate cuts aren't anywhere, right? Because we're not seeing them. The odds of a rate cuts are pretty low. There's navigating economic uncertainty, the impacts of these tariffs, the curve steepening, the U.S. Treasuries, there's sticky inflation. There's a lot of issues here. And on top of that, Jay Powell is refusing to cut. We have a 4.7% chance of a cut here at the next meeting in in just over 2 weeks. So I don't think that we're going to continue to see that here as things are rising up. And we're seeing the U.S. Treasury, the 10-year bond, the 10-year at nearly 4.5%, nearly at the all-time high, which we saw not too long ago at 4.8, 4.9%. And then on top of that, the 30-year is at 4.9%, nearly at the all-time high, which was just over 5. So, I mean, we're seeing the layover effects of these already in the bond market. The bond market is rockets high. I mean, skyrockets in flight. This is not afternoon delight, though. You know what I'm saying? Because we're seeing numbers that we've never seen, but we don't like to see all-time highs in this. And JP Morgan Chase, they're a big dog. 4.3 trillion in 2024. They've got a bunch of different, metrics here. JP Morgan is one of the biggest in the investment sector. And then we're seeing the Dixie crash under 99 for the first time since I've been tracking it with you guys in these past couple of months. And it's crazy. I honestly can't believe it. We're seeing the dollar crash and the market just pinging open here already down a little bit today, down 0.1% on the day. It started a little bit lower, but we're seeing it crawl back up here today. So the market is showing signs. Hey, we're seeing a weak dollar. We're not seeing strength. And I think it's, the fear that we're seeing in the market. A lot of things in the overall market is just, the global economic outlook, right? People are looking at the overall outlook on what is going on. Jamie Dimon saying, hey, it's going to happen. This crack, they're going to start to surface. Seeing these headlines and, going out and, in fact, saying all of this is not a positive sign for what we see here. Jamie Dimon has a lot of influence, whether you like him or not. He has a lot of influence on what we're seeing. And I think he was around, or I know he was around during 94. And he's seeing, hey, there was 1.5 trillion lost in the market value across the globe. The crash has been described as the worst financial events for bond investors since 1927. Well, as many of you know, when you begin this massive amount of quantitative easing, when there's more money circulating there, the spikes up, the spikes down, they're a lot more drastic, and they're going to get closer together. So although that was, the biggest bond market crash that we saw in 70 years, it's not out of the realm of possibilities that we see a bigger even market crash than the biggest since we've seen since 94 start to come here in this time period. And I think we're already starting to see the signs of this with the massive amounts of yield that we're seeing in the bond yields, with the 4.4 bond yield grow massively, and the 10-year being at 4.9, nearly at 5. And then we're seeing that with the Dixie. Just look at this. You don't like to see 0.5% increase or decreases, in the Dixie, the strength of the dollar, in a single day. And we're seeing that here on this Monday. The start of the month is not looking hot. We had the biggest month we've ever seen here in 30 years for the month of May for the S&P 500, because the tariffs were removed. Well, the tariffs being removed are showing that, hey, the tariffs were the only thing keeping the dollar strong relative to everybody else. And now we're seeing that decline and decline quickly. So this is something to keep a very close eye on. And I will be tracking it here for the time being on this channel. So make sure you hit that subscribe button with the bell notifications so you guys know I'm going live. We're nearly at 200. So I know the 6 extra of you that are watching this that are not subscribed, please subscribe. Help me get to that 200 subscribers. Like it and hit subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. And I'll catch you guys all at the next one.